Good morning, all. We have 33 participants on the line at this point.
Okay, is everyone in?
We have 38 in at this point, so there are a few people coming in still, but if you want to get started, Wayne, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our special interest group panel from the Education and Training, Team Science Education and Training Special Interest Group. Several months ago, actually the planning for this started last year at our conference, and we've put together a wonderful panel for you to talk about examples of team science training at all different levels of training. And I would like to introduce our moderator for today, Heather Billings from the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Heather is involved in educational scholarship programs, faculty development, and she leads the team science education program for the Mayo Center for Clinical and Translational Science. So I'm going to turn it over to Heather. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wayne. And good morning and welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us. We're looking forward to sharing ideas and programming from our home institutions with you and really beginning a discussion which we can continue throughout the day. I just want to do some housekeeping that as a reminder, today's plenary will also focus on excellence in team science education. And the end of the day, we'll wrap up with the Team Science Education and Training Special Interest Group, and they'll be meeting at 3:30 Eastern Time. So I hope if you find what we share with you today interesting and you're not already a member of the SIG, you might check that out. Our 8-member panel, next please. Our 8-member panel includes current practitioners, educators, researchers, facilitators, and thought leaders charged with developing and supporting the current and next generation of scientists, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. Can you advance to the next slide, please?
Yep, I'm trying to, I'm sorry.
All right. I heard it said recently that the summer of 2020 is really a culmination of the 1918 flu epidemic, the 1930 depression, the 1960s civil rights movement, and with last week's SpaceX launch, it also has elements of the 1960s space race. Clearly, there has never been a better time to examine the current state of team science education and resources, benchmark best practices, partner with one another to share, and collaborate on how best to evaluate the impact and drive improvements. So I encourage you all throughout this presentation to use the chat to pose questions or share resources. Wayne and I will be moderating this back channel, and we'll have about 20 or 30 minutes for questions and answers and a rich discussion after the panel presentations. Liz and Pips will get us started, and then Diane will wrap it up with considerations for promotion and tenure policies and practices. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Liz.
And it would be just great if I could get this to advance. I'm really sorry. I can't get the slides to go forward. Maybe does someone else want to try sharing and see if they can get it to work? It was working before.
Yes, it was.
I downloaded to my computer, so I can just run it off mine if you'd like.
Okay, that'd be great.
I need to be allowed screen sharing, please. Thank you. Okay. Go ahead, Liz.
Okay, thanks so much to the SIG for inviting me to present our team's work. Today, I'm going to focus on the high school teachers rather than the students because they have such a central role in our team and of course are critical to developing curriculum. I'm going to be talking to you about a team science approach to developing high school curriculum that integrates biology and computer science. And I did record a lightning talk, Team Science Training #1, if you're interested in a little bit more information. Next, please. Our use of a team science approach came out of a response to an educational problem. The NSF STEM plus C program put out a call for K-12 curriculum integrating STEM subjects and computational thinking and approaches. So we feel that computational thinking and approaches are central to modern science and that STEM and computer science should be integrated in the high school classroom. However, teachers are usually trained in their discipline and they teach in single subject classrooms. So if you look at what's covered in a high school biology class and a high school computer science class, you can see that they're really different. And so it's really hard for individual teachers to develop curriculum on their own because they don't have enough understanding of each other's key concepts and approaches. But it's also hard to get teacher buy-in if the curriculum is imposed from above. And we also wanted to incorporate the research aspect of a citizen science project so that the students and teachers would be part of a research team. So we asked the question, how can we develop integrated bio-CS curriculum that teachers can really deliver? Next, please. So our transdisciplinary team approach, which of course we took, we call this the bio-CS Bridge Project. And you can see on the right, our team is composed of university faculty and students, as well as high school faculty and students that have either bio or CS or education expertise. That picture at the top is our faculty and current crop of students. The picture at the bottom is it's on a bridge on the WPI campus. It's all of our teachers that are involved. We started off with 4 teacher leaders, 2 bio-CS pairs in 2 high schools, and we incorporated 9 teacher integrators along the way. Next, please. So the curriculum is motivated by the Ecology Citizen Science Project. So citizen scientists collect information on native bumblebee pollinators and their floral resources with the goal of better understanding which species are in decline and taking action to prevent further decline and loss of biodiversity. So the student, shown by the girl at the top of the picture, can collect data on this ecosystem via our web app, store and organize the ecosystem data, visualize and analyze it, and simulate a virtual ecosystem. So the students are engaging in scientific practices using computational approaches to address an important biological problem. And they can either use our software that we provide, or they can develop their own software to approach the problem. Next, please. So how did we implement this? So the first year we developed a shared vision with our teachers playing an important role, did a lot of software development. In the summer, we had an institute where the teacher leaders learned to use all this software and they started to develop the curriculum. Then the next year they continued to develop and also implement the curriculum, as well as planning the next summer institute. And the Summer Institute 2019, the teacher leaders were training our new teacher integrators who were recruited during that year. And then now this year, all teachers have been implementing and assessing the curriculum, and we've had 5 callback meetings at WPI. Next, please. So just a little more about the Summer Institute. As I mentioned, it was led by the 4 teacher leaders and included bio and CS as well as integrated modules. And I think a real key to its success was that there was a lot of swapping of roles. So the teachers acted as students, The students acted as teachers. They were helping the teachers to understand computer science tools and concepts. And you can see in the figures on the left, the teachers reported an increase in content knowledge. And on the right, even more importantly, they reported increases in understanding, confidence in teaching, and using the tools for teaching this integrated curriculum. Next, please. So the callback sessions were really important for solidifying the team. So everybody really contributed. We had teacher integrator reports from the classroom. Then we'd have new tools and techniques that we'd been working on that the students would usually present and demo. We had roundtables. The last couple were virtual, which had some positives and negatives. One positive thing we found was that the chat box seemed to really encourage participation by the less vocal teachers. But of course, we really missed the in-person interaction. Next, please. So we asked the teachers how the team was valuable or challenging to them. And I want to just focus on the valuable. I think the most important thing really was that the transfer. So students started to see the connection between disciplines, and they transferred knowledge to different classes. And the teachers themselves developed a real appreciation for the other discipline. Next, please. So my favorite quote from a teacher: "What is great is the ongoing flipping of roles. The students are teachers, the teachers are students, the professors are teachers, and everyone is learning." So I think we really developed a huge appreciation for everybody's contribution to this project. Next, please. Future work, we're looking at evaluation, of course, creation of sustainable professional development workshops, dissemination, and we hope we've come up with a team science blueprint for an integrated curriculum development that we hope other teams of university and high schools can adopt. Next, please. And this last slide is just a thank you slide to the many students who participated over the 3 years in software development, as well as the teachers, and of course to NSF, whose funding made the work possible. Thanks so much.
Okay, thanks, Liz. That was great. A great way to start us off. So my name is Pip Speasy. I am the PI for a multi-team interdisciplinary research project examining the changes that are happening in Alaska. And we have about 100 people engaged on that project that I lead, students, researchers, staff. But I'm also one of the 3 leads for this project called Teaching Through Technologies Alliance, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So T3 is a partnership with the groups that you see on the screen here, the Partnership for Council for Opportunity Education that supports TRIO programs on many of your campuses like Upward Bound, Talent Search, McNair, Student Support Services, the National Science Foundation EPSCoR program, the established program to stimulate competitive research, and the University of Alaska Fairbanks, which is my home institution. This partnership's been a major research project for EPSCoR and our Upward Bound program, and it works so well in Alaska, we decided to use this model to scale up the structure that now spans the United States. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. So as the slide indicates on the right, the 3 pillars of our project are growth mindset, technology skills, and community projects. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, this project stems from a former National Science Foundation project called the Modern Blanket Toss. The name refers to this Alaska Indigenous practice of tossing a person up in the air using a blanket as a sort of trampoline to see beyond the horizon. And today we can do this with unmanned aerial systems to look beyond where we ourselves can see by standing on the ground. So this idea is focused around connecting these EPSCoR programs that have resources and a mission to increase STEM capacity in their states with one of the 800 or so Upward Bound programs for underserved schools that are scattered across our country. So the central elements of these projects are threefold. This really cool technology like unmanned systems, aerial systems, and underwater vehicles and remote controlled cars, 3D printing, and programming Raspberry Pi computers. And we also have a focus on leadership, communication, and team science that's embedded in the curriculum. And kids are using these skills that they've fostered to carry out projects in their home communities that benefit them. So in these photos, the students are using an unmanned system to map their local river to see where erosion's taking place in a landscape that's really hard to get to by foot. Next slide, please. We started with one project in Alaska that served 8 schools. Since then, we've expanded to 56 institutions across 36 states and are continuing to grow. We've also started to serve programs funded by the Department of Education through a round of supplemental awards to the Upward Bound program. So we've just been trying to be flexible in promoting our different kind of streams of funding. And other programs outside of Upward Bound have kind of heard about our work and asked to join. So it's been a very organic kind of expansion. Next slide, please. So I very much appreciated the workshop that Michelle Bennett and Roger Swartz ran on Monday, and their focus on mindsets. They presented this really interesting mutual learning mindset, which I just love, and I can't wait to dive into more, that explains how to maximize your team's effectiveness when you have interactive and integrated teams. A number of years ago, when we wrote our proposal, we decided to adopt a growth mindset framework to convey the belief that students can and want to learn how to manage their social and emotional learning as well, and share responsibility for their learning, but also give back to their communities. So we talk a lot about embracing a growth mindset, both with our students, but also with the teachers that we train, who are often after school and Upward Bound teachers who may or may not have science or a technical background and are learning along many times with their students. So like Liz mentioned in the previous talk, students may become teachers and teachers may become students, and that's really encouraged. I think it takes a confident teacher to assume a student role and a compassionate student to serve as a teacher. So part of the curriculum includes developing a simple collaboration plan. Who will do what? What happens if they experience conflict? How will they make decisions about what projects to take on? So we talk a lot about the different tasks that have to be done, but as well as the team makeup and who's going to take on what roles. So really it's just the team science training is kind of embedded into our teaching. So our project leaders, next slide, please. Our project leadership team has been working for about 5 years together now. Over these 5 years, we've worked with hundreds of teachers and thousands of students. So we've curated the equipment and developed exercises that promote a team learning approach and talk to students about what it means to work in a team and to depend on each other. And the different skill sets are required for the various projects that they create, and the basic project management principles around planning and anticipating problems and getting feedback to improve their work. So we use design thinking principles to approach community projects by asking questions like, how might we address this problem? And what do our community leaders feel is important? And developing prototypes to test various options quickly. The students know a lot about their communities, and we talk about bringing compassion and empathy to the people that we are helping and working with. Next slide, please. With the technology lessons, we start with a really simple exercise to let the kids get the feel of building things. In this case, a very simple little toothbrush robot. We talk about adopting a growth mindset through the entire experience. We want them to feel successful and confidence from the very first step. And we want our instructors to feel that as well. And in every event we've held, the students quickly see that they can use this idea of a growth mindset to their advantage and don't miss an opportunity. If one of their teachers says, I'm too old, or I can't do this, or how am I supposed to figure this out? The students really jump on that really quickly. So it's lovely to see them taking that into their language. Next slide, please. So we've since created an online portal for lessons and tutorials that students can access. And I'm just gonna kind of go through this quickly. There's a suite of lessons that students can work through on their own. And then as they progress, they get more advanced material. Next slide. We also have a support forum that teachers and students can use to learn more about the program. And then finally, the next slide, please. The program uses Discord channels as a home base for participants to post questions. Rather than having project staff and teachers monitor the questions, we've created a community where all participants can help each other. Then the final slide. We talk a lot about leadership and what it means to be a part of our team. Our primary project leadership team consists of a PI and two co-PIs and a group of amazingly talented people with computer science, teaching, project management, counseling skills. And we talk a lot about why we were doing this work. When we first received the grant, we had a retreat to organize and spent time talking about the values of the project. And our 5 values are adaptable, fun, inquiry, respect, and equity. And they're really meaningful to us and help us make decisions about the project, excuse me. I work with a lot of large interdisciplinary teams across the country, and the preliminary work that we do to kind of identify these values and craft collaboration plans really sets us up well to address in explicit terms how we want to operate. So I think I will end there, and thank you for attending our session.
Thanks, Pips. I think we have time for maybe one question for Pips. And I'm so excited to hear about your stuff, and it's so exciting to me that you started with one project in 8 schools and you've expanded in this way, because we're sort of at the one project 8 schools. I'm wondering, I love the connection with the local communities. Can you tell us a little more about some of the projects the students have done with their communities?
Yeah, so that is a really key element of our project, because we wanted to really give back to the communities, and the students wanted to give back to their communities. So I mentioned the one about mapping a river that was really hard to get to, but the community was experiencing some erosion. And so the kids learned how to fly the autonomous vehicles, and they could map the river and show how the stream was changing over time. That's one example. A couple of other examples are, food is really expensive out in rural Alaska, and so the students have been making these vertical grow towers and growing vegetables for their communities. So that's just kind of a couple of examples, but I want to stop there because I'd love to give Liz a question too if we have time, but if we don't, I guess we need to move on. So.
Yeah, I think we should probably move on.
Okay. Okay.
All right, thanks very much, Liz and Pips. Laura and I are going to be talking, me first and then Laura, about opportunities for training undergrads in the team science skills. I'll be talking specifically about the Bachelor of Knowledge Integration program at the University of Waterloo, which is not specifically a team science program, but it is about interdisciplinarity and collaboration and appreciation for the value that different disciplines and different perspectives can bring to problem solving. And so in that sense, it's very appropriate in terms of the questions of what does it mean to train undergraduates to be in this space where they might be doing team science, but they're definitely doing interdisciplinary collaboration. So it's a unique 4-year honors degree. It took its first cohort in 2008, and it leads to a Bachelor of Knowledge Integration, and this is perhaps the only program that delivers this degree. The cohort size is small. It's typically between 25 and 30, so that allows us to do a lot of things in the classroom and have a lot of great discussion. It attracts students that are interested in a broad variety of disciplines, don't want to make a choice, are not particularly wanting to specialize. And that means that in the classrooms, we have students who are, excuse me, doing minors with computer science and joint degrees with fine arts, and they're all working together in groups. So there's a lot of opportunity to have cross-disciplinary dialogue. The program itself is rooted in experiential learning, interdisciplinary thinking, collaboration, and problem solving. And some of the outcomes that we strive for are that every student has an area of specialization. And that area of specialization might be aligned with something that we would find in the traditional academy. So it might be that the person really loves biology and they come out with a joint degree in biology and Bachelor of Knowledge Integration. Or it might be that the student wants to do something, combine things in a way that isn't available in the traditional academy. So, for example, we have had students go on to do speech pathology graduate work, and this particular student in particular took courses from anatomy, anthropology, linguistics, and biology, and combined them in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do in a typical traditional degree. We try to achieve disciplinary openness with our students. We teach them not just the value that different perspectives can bring, but different ways that disciplines create and consume knowledge, and how to integrate this appreciation for disciplinary diversity in their own practice. So those of you that are familiar with, well, everybody will be familiar with Bloom's cognitive taxonomy. Some of you will be familiar with Bloom's affective taxonomy, and we typically tend to teach in the cognitive domain, but I found Bloom's affective taxonomy to be a really valuable framework in which to think about the kind of education that people need in order to collaborate, because a lot of that has to do with the way that we value others and the way that we interact with others with empathy and so on. And these are really affective qualities. And so within Bloom's affective taxonomy, we look not just for recognizing and understanding, which are the lower levels equivalent to knowledge and understanding in the cognitive taxonomy, but we look towards we look to move students from those basic levels all the way up to integrating and operationalizing their understanding of the value of diversity. This gives them translation skills, the ability to sit down at a table with people from different disciplines and translate between those groups. And a big part of the program is self-awareness. So we spend a lot of time scaffolding teamwork, collaboration of various models throughout the core curriculum, but also giving them explicit opportunities to reflect on what they're learning, to sort of step out of the coursework, step out of the experience, and understand and put down how that experience has impacted them as a person. And then the last sort of desired outcome is that they have collaboration tools and models and experiences for, in particular, for interdisciplinary collaboration. Next slide, please. So the program is structured in if we imagine a pie that's divided into quarters, 1/4 of that is the core courses. And those are delivered by knowledge integration core faculty. And they are the art and science of learning. We also use design thinking, introduce design thinking as a framework for group problem solving. So we're emphasizing, again, like Liz said, empathy for the stakeholder, understanding of the problem in all of its contexts and different disciplinary perspectives. Conflict resolution is a part of the core. The nature of knowledge, and I want to expand a little bit on these two courses. So this is 2 courses. The first one is on the scientific nature of knowledge. So this is essentially comparing how knowledge is created and consumed across the scientific disciplines and how that differs and where the similarities are. And the second course is on the situated nature of knowledge. So essentially a course based in feminist epistemology that helps the students understand the difference between objective and subjective, understand their biases, build models for making decisions within a subjective context. These courses are taught by Katie Plaisance, who's actually going to be expanding a little bit on her experience teaching collaboration to non-KI students in today's plenary. They have a research methods course, and then they have a capstone design course, which I teach. In this context, the students are working in interdisciplinary groups of 5 to 6 people, and they're researching and designing and building a 225 square foot museum exhibit. So they take this all the way from what are we going to teach visitors about, to how are we going to do that, to a paper model, and then on to building the physical thing. And then it's capped off with a senior independent research project that will be a wide variety of different topics, basically aligned with whatever the student's area of specialization is. 1/4 of the courses are breadth courses, and this is where the students are taking courses from the other disciplines to give them a little bit of disciplinary understanding. An important aspect of this is that the students take these non-core courses with other majors. And so part of what I'm hoping to do today is if there are institutions that are thinking about how to design programs from the ground up, I want to be able to give a little bit of our experience. And one of the things that we've noticed with that is that while some interdisciplinary degrees bring faculty experts from other departments to teach their interdisciplinary cohort, so science for the art sci students, for example, we've designed it so that the knowledge integration students are going and taking their science courses with the science majors, with the math majors, with the CS majors. And what that does is it gives them the actual practical experience, the lived experience of going into a context where they can observe the things that Katie's talking about in her Nature of Scientific Knowledge course. So Katie gives them the frameworks, and then they go and they actually are embedded in those disciplinary cultures, and they can actually make those observations and connections with the framework. So that's been really effective. And the other half are elective courses. And so this is where the students will pick will create their area of specialization by choosing courses from across campus. Next slide, please. And so if team science is defined, and I took this from the Science of Team Science website, the Insights website, as science which is collaborative and often cross-disciplinary, here are some of the things that we think this requires. And I look forward to this afternoon's conversation where we'll be talking about the sort of what are the core elements of teaching team science. But an appreciation for different epistemic cultures and knowledge paradigms. And I'm being careful not to use the word disciplines here. It's difficult to draw the boundaries around a discipline. What is the discipline of geography when it includes, you know, social geographers and geographers of place, but it also includes people who do pore samples. So epistemic cultures and knowledge paradigms, the ability to translate across disciplines or across conversations within a cross-disciplinary group. Teamwork structure and process. There is so much embedded in this bullet, as we all know, but including building trust, but also what are collaborative decision-making models, project management, how to run a meeting. So some very pragmatic things, but also some important frameworks and theory. One of the things that I think we've taken away as instructors within the program is that it's valuable to be explicit and intentional in what you're doing. And I like to think of the way that we scaffold experiences as providing knowledge, or scaffold education, I'm sorry, as providing knowledge, experiences, and frameworks. So knowledge to give them the basic understanding, experiences that give them the applied practice of that understanding, and importantly, frameworks in which they can pick apart, deconstruct those experiences and understand them relative to one another. And I think I'll use the example of teamwork. When I used to teach in engineering, electrical engineering at Waterloo, we would put engineers into groups for capstone design project, and we would give them no instruction on how to behave in a group, what to expect, group dynamics models, how to build trust. We would just say go, and they would, you know, either sink or swim. So that's one approach. Another approach is to put people into groups and to give them some idea that maybe building trust is going to be important. But without giving them a framework. So, you know, and I don't think it matters which framework you give them, but give them some framework. And I think about Bruce Tuckman's framework for collaboration or Pat Lancioni's work on dysfunctions of a team as examples. Giving them a framework allows them to understand and what is happening when trust fails, what is happening when people aren't held accountable, how to step out of that, deconstruct it, analyze it, and then how to intervene. So those frameworks are critically important. And that's one example from collaboration and group work, but there are others. And finally, I would just say, take the time to tell them why. So much of what we do as educators, we do because we know it's good and we know it's good for them. But we don't, we sometimes fail to understand that these are sort of threshold concepts where we've become the expert and we understand that it's valuable. We don't remember what it's like to not understand why we would be doing this thing. And so one of the things that we've found very effective with our students is to explain why we're teaching the course in a particular way, why this framework is important, why I'm asking you to reflect. And the students have expressed a lot of appreciation and greatly increased buy-in to the activities that we're asking them to do when we explain to them why we're having them do that. And so I'll stop there and pass it over to Laura to describe her exciting program. And then we'll have questions, I think, at the end of the session.
Thanks, Rob. I think you all will hear, I've enjoyed talking to Rob about his program. I think you'll hear some similarities in terms of the kind of interdisciplinary applied focus of the Best Connections program at Duke. So I'm Laura Howes. I'm the director of the program called Best Connections. We are in our 7th year. This is a university-wide program at Duke to offer students and faculty the opportunity to engage in interdisciplinary applied research. And it is all collaborative and team-based. So there's kind of 3 core connections that weave the program together, which you see here. So one is that it's interdisciplinary. So we are addressing societal problems by kind of using different disciplinary techniques. The second is that it's vertically integrated. So undergraduate, graduate, professional students working alongside faculty. I'll be talking mostly today about how we equip undergraduate students to participate and what they benefit from it, but graduate and professional students also have a huge benefit. And then also connections between the academy and the broader world. So our projects are focused on societally relevant problems and often include external community partners. In terms of the scope, we have about 60 different research teams running a year. And the way this works is that faculty partner together to propose a research project. So we typically have about 2, sometimes as many as 4 faculty leading a project. They're often from different disciplines, although not always. And they propose the projects, and then we form teams of undergraduate and graduate students to work with them. Students always come from different disciplines, so we're kind of bridging that disciplinary divide. We have about 1,000 participants in the program at this point, and for undergraduate and graduate students, this is a curricular program, so they're getting course credit for participating, but it's not a typical lecture format. They're really working collaboratively with faculty over the course of an entire year. That sometimes also includes summer work intensively on this research project. Next slide, please. So the way that we kind of focus, we have these 5 theme areas, which are broad interdisciplinary themes, but focus projects around societal issues of importance. And they're each hosted within an interdisciplinary institute at Duke. So the 5 themes are listed here, but just to give a couple examples of teams. So in our information society and culture team, we had a team that was using algorithms to detect gerrymandering. In the education and human development theme, we've had a team looking at best practices for developing critical thinking skills in K through 2nd grade students within Durham Public Schools, where Duke is located. And then in our global health theme, we've had a team going out to Nepal looking at how you can use mHealth applications to reduce hypertension. So just to give you kind of a flavor, the topics are, you know, very broad and interdisciplinary and wide ranging, but focused on societal issues within these theme areas. Next slide, please. So in terms of, because this is a very different experience for students, faculty, they are applied research questions. Faculty are looking for students to partner with them on solving research questions which they themselves do not have the answers to. So that can be a little bit discomforting for undergraduate students, but also I think where the real value lies in them learning how to contribute to a complex research problem. So we regularly evaluate our teams and look for common threads in terms of what makes a team successful and where our teams struggle. And it will probably be no surprise to you guys that it really doesn't matter what the team is focused on. The challenges and the best practices are common across the board. So we've kind of boiled them down to these 7 elements here. The first is foundation setting. So for undergraduate students, how do you provide some foundational elements, get them up to speed on the methods and the skills, but do that quickly so that they can really then jump into contributing to the research project is an important piece. The second is just clear goals and roles. So where students do not know how they can contribute, sometimes they really flounder to find a place in the team, become disengaged. And then just setting kind of clear expectations for engagement. As much as undergraduate students might find passion and enjoy the opportunity to dig into a research project, they also have many priorities. So making it clear how everyone is expected to contribute. For that reason, you know, this is a curricular program, so teams do meet regularly, but making sure that those teams are really, those meetings are used effectively to keep the train moving and keep tasks moving along is really important. Because teams are interdisciplinary and we have faculty from different groups working together, sometimes those faculty partnerships are new. Sometimes they're existing collaborations, but also making sure that we're working with faculty leaders to figure out how they can set their leadership structures up for success is an important piece. And then layered mentoring. So I mentioned it's a vertically integrated program. I think this is one element of the program that really stands out to me as being really, really important and successful. Undergraduate students really value the opportunity to work with graduate students, to have kind of a near peer who they can go to and ask questions around research. And graduate students really benefit from having that kind of leadership and mentorship opportunity as well. So just emphasize that connection is a really important piece of the program. And then finally, just building in opportunities for students to really reflect on what they're learning, as well as that includes kind of, you know, what it means to work together on a team, as well as the research process. Next slide, please. I won't spend much time here. We just encourage folks to, if you have the time, to go back and click on these links or go to the Bass Connections website. You'll see that we've developed a lot of resources to support teams around these elements. In our Team Resource Center, we have a project charter, we have some research support and tools, which all kind of map back to addressing those elements of team success, which I just mentioned. So I think it just kind of underscores the point Rob made about being intentional about the teamwork process and making sure that people have support and scaffolding around those elements. Next page, next slide. So what do these teams do? We let teams define success, and sometimes that success might actually be, you know, we tried a research direction, we found out that it's a dead end, and that's perfectly fine. What we don't want to see is teams that fail because they can't get the team dynamics right. So our teams are very creative and come up with a broad number of outputs and outcomes. Many of those are traditional research outputs like white papers, journal publications, which often include undergraduate students as first authors. You know, many people are collecting data that feeds into future grants, but we also have many applied outcomes. So this image here, just one example, we had a team that's been working for a couple of years to look at how illegal gold mining in the Peruvian Amazon is releasing mercury into the environment. And so this is, you know, they were published in the Journal of Nature, but they also had a team working with the Peruvian government to directly feed their data to the Peruvian government, who then used their data to inform where to provide emergency food aid to communities along the river who should no longer be eating fish out of the river because there's high levels of mercury. So there's a huge range of kind of traditional research outputs as well as really applied outcomes coming out of this work. Next slide, please. So just quickly, in terms of the impact on undergraduate students, we are constantly looking at different ways of evaluating the program. So some things that we see is just the opportunity for students to engage deeply in something over the course of a year. And that includes, you know, helping them figure out their interests and their passions, developing relationships with faculty and students of different levels in a kind of a close way that's not, you know, typical of your standard course. And we also see that many students carry their experience into, you know, completing theses projects. Students who participate in Bass Connections complete theses at much higher rates than the general undergraduate population at Duke. And then skill development. So this year we did a new pre-post assessment where we asked students prior to their participation in the program the extent to which they felt strong in different skill dimensions. We also created kind of a matching group that we used as a comparison, and then we did a post assessment of our students as well as the match group. And we've seen that students who've done Bass Connections have had significant gains in their ability to work in teams, which we would hope to see, as well as to communicate across disciplines, to tackle complex problems, things of that nature. And then finally, we are in our 7th year, so we are kind of just now shifting to the alumni piece of assessing our impact, but we know from our kind of exit survey of seniors that students who do Bass Connections are a lot more likely to be moving into kind of social sector employment. And we have been tracking, you know, a set of alumni anecdotally and have a sense that they're really kind of taking, in many instances, the passion they found in this program and carrying it into their careers. But we'll be looking over the next year or so to have kind of a more holistic understanding of that. So that was it. I see there's one question about funding that came in, so I'll just address that. So Bass Connections is funded by a donor, the Bass family, hence the name, who started the program, and then we also have additional donors. The funding goes to support teams, so each team is allocated a budget to use that's on average about $18,000. So if you have a team that's traveling to Nepal to assess M-Health, for example, they need some travel funding, or sometimes it's lab supplies and materials, things of that nature. Great. Well, with that, unless we have time for questions, I think we'll turn it over to Susan.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Susan Cousins from Georgia Tech. I'm really glad to see graduate students roll up in this series of presentations. The first time I came to a SITES meeting, I was Vice Provost for Graduate Education at Georgia Tech. We knew our students were all working in teams, and they were going to be working in teams for most of their careers, and they really needed to know things from SITES as a field. But there was very little there that reflected their experience. And we've come a long way since then, so I'm glad to see the attention to graduate students. Next slide, please. I want to show you the team that's been working on the project that I'm talking about. We've got the two curriculum developers on the right, Mary Lynn and Kata, two people doing assessment of the curriculum, Meltsim and Chris. And then Angus Wilkinson has been helping convert the materials for use in classroom settings. Next slide. Because of the gap that we saw, well, let me stop on this. What was it that I thought was so distinctive about the experience of graduate students in teams? Many of our graduate students are international. They don't have the kind of undergraduate team experiences that you've just been hearing about. They come in very diffident. They feel like they're moving into an expert domain where they don't have any expertise yet. They have this very strong power relationship with their advisors or PIs. And while they're going to be working with a team, a group of students around that advisor, probably for 5 or 6 years, the membership of the team is going to roll over time, and they're going to be working on different projects. And I just didn't hear any of that being addressed in what I heard in that first SITES meeting that I went to. Next slide, please. So we applied for a grant from the National Science Foundation, from the Innovations in Graduate Education program, to develop training for graduate students, specifically in team skills. The scope is STEM programs, which includes the social sciences, so it includes virtually all of the graduate students on our campus. And we have focused on transportable skills rather than discipline-based experiences, so we don't do as much on knowledge integration as many of the other projects that you've heard about already. We have developed some materials that we've used in a one-day workshop format, and also are working on 45-minute versions of many of the activities so that they can be used in professional development seminars, and we've experimented with that a little bit. We'd love to actually be able to have these used in working research teams, and I think Georgia Tech is coming up with some ideas on how that might happen. It's fairly resource intensive, as you can imagine. Next slide. We started to develop the curriculum materials by listening to our graduate students. We had focus groups with students from different parts of campus and said, what are you experiencing in this? In these teams? A lot of relationships with the advisors and PIs came up in those contributions. Often the students were in contributor roles, which we expected, but more often than we thought, they were actually being moved into informal leadership roles of various sorts. And then, of course, there's a lot of conflict within teams over things like data access and equipment sharing. Next slide. So we took that material actually and built it into scenarios in the modules that we've developed. There are 4 base modules that we've worked on several times and have gone through assessment and development. And I'm going to go through the topics of those, but let me just say that each one of them includes an activity that engages the students and gives them an experience with the skill that we're trying to develop for them. Each one of them is rooted in the SITES literature in some way. Each one has a tool that they can take away and use back in their home teams if they want to, and then we try and pin down some key takeaways for them. So one is on innovation and creativity, really gives them a sense for how it's different to do something, to work on something together than individually. Next slide. The next one is actually on diversity. We work on deep diversity, on differences in communication styles and how those can work together for teams. Next slide. The third one deals with effective communication. This is where we use those scenarios that we developed right out of their experiences, anonymized, of course, and put together in some different ways, really trying to get them to think about what are the challenges out there. How does this relate to differences in mental models that may come from different disciplines? And then what can you do to address those challenges? Next slide. And the fourth one is on leveraging and managing conflict, leveraging the professional conflict that makes for that interdisciplinary integration and managing the personal conflict. And then we have a new addition, next slide, that we just offered for the first time a couple of weeks ago on teaming virtually, really focusing on what makes it harder to work as a team when you're doing all or a large part of your work over a distance. Again, rooted in the literature, showing them some tools and then giving them a really dramatic example of a very big team. This is one of the places where we're trying to get the graduate students to grasp further from their current roles what it means to feel like a team, to think like a team, and then to work like a team. So now on to Kathy.
Great, thanks, Susan. I think that what I have to say is really complementary to what you just described. I'm Kathleen Weathers, and I want to talk about the GLION Graduate Fellowship Program. My co-PI for this was Paul Hansen, University of Wisconsin, and it was supported by the National Science Foundation through the Macrosystems Biology Program. Next slide, please. I'm going to say a little bit about the context of this fellowship program, because it was the this context from which the program evolved and is evolving. So GLION, the Global Lake Ecological Observatory Network, is a network that was started in 2005. And when it was started, it was really focused on cyber infrastructure and instrumentation for lakes. We've evolved grassroots style to do network lake science now. Next slide, please. And somewhere along the way, we, the leadership of GLION, realized that we weren't one network, we were actually three networks. And the three networks are data, and a lot of those data come from these heterogeneous, beautiful instruments in lakes around the world, and also lakes. So those two networks, data and lakes. Next slide, please. But most important, we realized that we were a network of people, and our attentions kind of turned when we realized that it was really the people that was making the science move, that we should focus on skills and protocols and collaborative skills. So we now are at 900 people from around the world. It's important that it's grassroots. Again, there's no top-down money for this program. People are engaging because they want to engage. And of those 900 members, a third are graduate students, which is really critically important, coming from 61 countries, 7 continents. Next slide, please. So we've asked ourselves this question all along, is what keeps us together, what helps us shape the science? And I'm not going to go through all of these points. They'll look very familiar to you, I think. But I want to emphasize that the graduate student involvement, there was a graduate student association that evolved right from the beginning of the GLION network. And the network itself evolved to empowering graduate students, to empowering them to take leadership roles, to supporting them. And so it's from this Graduate Student Association and the GLION philosophy that the GLION Fellowship Program evolved. Next slide, please. So this fellowship program, which started in 2011 and wound down in its current form in 2018, was put together because we realized that the future of science includes team science. And to our knowledge, this was kind of the beginning of team science, or at least our world, the ecological world, understanding that there was such a thing as team science. And at the time, and still now in our field, team science training is rare. So the way we put this program together was to build cohorts, and these about 12 students per cohort from about 12 different institutions. So they came from all over the world, primarily the US, but all over the world. And this group of students met together for a year and a half, both physically for a week at a time and virtually. And the goal was to develop team products. And so the way we did this was to incorporate team science training, facilitation, conflict mediation, collaborative skills, and to utilize that team science training in service of developing manuscripts, analyses, and also learning new high-frequency big data skills and synthesis. So again, we created products, and those included open source models, publications, presentations. These were our metrics of success, the primary metrics of success. And also going back and re-engaging with the Gleon network. So carrying these tools and skills forward to the Gleon network. Next slide, please. So as I said, this program has wound down and evolved in different ways within the Gleon network. But one really interesting thing at carrying it forward, and this was actually led, this survey and synthesis was led by one of our fellows. We went back to the macrosystems biology PIs community and their projects and started to ask the questions, what are the skills that we need, and are they being taught in universities, in programs? And so this shows you the suite of skills that this group of 80 to 100 people thought were necessary, and where the highlights are, especially the pink highlights, are those team science skills that we incorporated into the Gleon Fellowship Program and that seem to be absent. Maybe not as much now as in the past, but seem to be absent from individual research and research labs and university systems. And the other ones in the green are skills that are not absent, but not always that frequently achieved. And so one of our bottom lines was that it's unlikely that many departments can incorporate all of this training, and so we're thinking about models that are complementary to individual research programs, labs, departments, and that's the kind of model that this group of people is trying to promote in the future. Next slide, please. So for our outputs and outcomes, and I'll be really interested to have some conversations with this whole group and those of you who have tuned in about assessment. So as I said, our goal was to produce peer-reviewed publications, to produce products, scientific products. But there are other things that came out of this program that were equally important and for which we have little data. And part of it was the student-led symposia. Oops, I'm getting a little feedback here. Student-led symposia, and how the students took these new skills and took them back to their labs, took them back to their new jobs, and have developed out programs. So that's the playing it forward part. So I think I'll leave it there and answer any questions if we have time, and if not, we'll go to the next presenter.
So if there's no questions in the chat, I have one for you, Kathleen.
Yes, Susan.
So you've got your 12 fellows, and they are quite widely distributed geographically, but they're working on projects together. So how does the virtual part of that work? And have you ever seen a conflict emerge in one of those team projects, and how did they resolve it with their virtual tools? Any ideas?
Yes, so early on in Gleon, we learned that the combination of virtual and face-to-face was crucially important, and that actually starting with face-to-face built trust and built a team, and virtual could complement that. So our model has been to do face-to-face and then virtual, which makes it a lot easier. We're in a new world now. I'll be very interested to see some of your modules. Yes, we have had conflicts, and they're the conflicts that you would expect about authorship, about different philosophies. Actually, the first cohort, we had Michael O'Rourke and Stephen Crowley come and work with us with a toolbox project. But so we have had conflicts, and we have worked it out through conversation and building agreements about how things will progress.
Okay, so like team charters, do the graduate student teams do something charter-like at the beginning of their efforts?
They, yes, yeah, the charter-like part of it, I think, is authorship agreements and
Okay.
leadership agreements. And that evolved over the course of cohorts. And now it's quite wonderful to see them go out into new collaborations and start with, we need to have agreement about authorship. And
that's a really nice example, because our student participants sometimes say, oh, all this stuff is really for our PIs to pay attention to. The PIs are really in charge of the team, but this is a nice example where horizontal agreements between the students is actually very important. Thank you.
Heather, do we have time for another question? Can I ask Susan if there isn't one in there, or should we move on?
I think we should probably move on. Can you hold it?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so we'll move on to early career researchers. We are going to be looking at the early career research and even further into other researchers. So Diane and I are going to be focusing on this, focusing on more post-university and looking at careers. She's going to be looking at kind of the tenure and promotion process for researchers. I'm Don Takahara. I am at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I am in the College of Engineering Office of Research. And a little bit about me. So after I got my PhD in chemical engineering, I spent 16 years at Dow Chemical doing research and development. Then made the switch over to academia, went to Taylor University in Indiana, was director of the Center for Research and Innovation. I was a professor in engineering and chemistry. Then I moved to University of Illinois. So my role now in the Office of Research is doing research development, so helping faculty move forward with their research and primarily with funding. And I also do some faculty development too. And I'm actually also a certified coach. So I do some coaching of our faculty in particularly in career and leadership. So I'm going to particularly be focusing on the tenure track early career faculty in engineering, because that's the group that I've been working on. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to be talking about this changing landscape. And what is the changing landscape? Well, there are two areas of changing in funding opportunities and our early career faculty. And therefore, we're kind of at this prime time for training of our early career faculty in team science. So next slide, please. So when we talk about the changing landscape in funding opportunities, all of you probably see this, that there are less single PI grants and more collaborative team science grants. And I have 3 examples here. So just so you know, these 3 examples come actually from my own experience. So if you want more information, I'd be willing to share that with you. Also, I took programs, not particularly grant opportunities, but programs, and also from 3 different agencies. So NSF has, of course, their convergence research. It's one of NSF's 10 big ideas, taking widely diverse fields, merging them in terms of ideas, approaches, and technologies, yielding even new disciplines, and therefore stimulating innovation, discovery, and tackling the biggest grand challenges in our world. The Army Research Laboratory has what they have called their open campus and have regional sites in the US in the central, northeast, south, and west parts of the US. So the idea is they co-locate with universities and companies and work together in teams to move forward on various areas that ARL is interested in. Finally, the DOE example there is Sandia National Laboratory. They have an academic alliance where they have 5 different universities, and they focus on bringing faculty and researchers from Sandia together. They have some seed funding through the Laboratory Directed R&D program, and then taking that to be able to do bigger and better things with collaborative grant proposals, et cetera. So that's the changing landscape from the funding opportunities. If we go to the next slide, we're talking about, okay, what's happened with the early career faculty? And I could summarize that pretty in general, that, you know, our young people that are in their late 20s and 30s think differently than those of us in our 50s and 60s. So our young faculty that are coming in, they kind of had this idea of, yeah, I'm willing to and wanting to break the mold because they kind of have this startup and entrepreneurial mindset. They're technology oriented, they're big data oriented, and they're also transformation oriented. I remember hearing that the changes that typically used to take 25 years is now happening in 5 years or less. They're used to this fast change kind of thing. Team science. So earlier, you've heard about all the different team science training that's going on. So some of them have been a part of that, and they see that early in their careers as they're at the universities. They see that more funding opportunities are team science. So yeah, if I want to get my research funded, I need to be looking at team science. And I think there is an increased openness of higher ed to, early career faculty on teams. So I say this all in that, at least from engineering, in the past, that has not been encouraged. Team science and being part of teams has not been encouraged for early career faculty because they have been, told to focus on, their individual achievements to get tenure. Diane's going to be talking a little bit more about the tenure process and team science and promotion. So you'll hear a little bit more about that. She has some more information on that. So if you go to the next slide. I have some examples here, and these examples are definitely looking at faculty who are junior faculty. So they're assistant professors, some associate professors, and they have conceptualized and implemented team science. So they are just not participating in it, but they are the leaders in this. So this first one is the Center for High Efficiency Electrical Technologies for Aircraft. They have a $6 million 3-year NASA University Leadership Initiative grant. You could see all the different people that are working on that, all the different organizations. And we have an assistant professor from aerospace and an associate professor from electrical engineering. So let's go to the next slide. The next slide is this cyber octopus that learns, evolves, and adapts. So this is AMIRI, ONR multi-university research initiative. You can see the universities that are involved there. You can see that it is AI, biology, autonomy, robotics, and you can see the 3 faculty that are there, all assistant and associate professors from 2 different departments. So if you go to the next slide. So this one is Civil Infrastructure Systems Open Knowledge Network, and this is an associate professor in civil engineering with NSF Convergence Accelerator, and doing this with University of Southern California. I'm going to move on here. So let's go to the next slide. And so basically, I hope you can see that I think we are ready to train our faculty. I think I'm talking about we're ready because I have not done very much of this. So here's some of the questions that I have as I look at if I'm going to do this or how do I do this. The first one is, what is the big picture impact of team science of training early career faculty? I think it's important to ask the why. And so to me, one of the whys, for example, would be the future of team science and leaders of team science are going to be our early career faculty. So I think we should be helping them now, not waiting until they get to the point where they can do it. And they just showed that they're actually doing it already. Of course, what's the best way? What are the best practices to train our early career faculty? And also, when we look at training our early career faculty, we need to realize that funding agencies and our research institutes play a big role. So we need to have training that includes, basically all 3 of those. And maybe there's a certain amount of training of our research institutes in early career researchers in team science. So those are the questions that I have. I think I'm going to go ahead and have Diane go ahead and take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. This is Diane Ranwala. I am happy to be here today. I'm going to share with you one of the studies that we did in evaluating academic institutions' promotion, support for team science in the context of junior investigators and the career development. Next slide, please. This is a teamwork led by Susan McHale in Penn State You can see the other team members of our team here. I also listed the publication that was a result of this study. Next slide, please. So we know that teamwork is important. We also know that individuals are motivated to align their work with the reward system of their organization. In the academy, the reward system is the promotion and tenure. But there are concerns raised about this, particularly, as you may have heard throughout the conference, whether the institutions are really supporting the team science and whether the faculty members are rewarded for their team science in the reward system. So to address this, there are lots of literature that came out with recommendations. When we reviewed this literature about 2 years ago, there was only very limited empirical research. So we wanted to shed some new light. Next slide, please. We wanted to shed some new light on the role of promotion and tenure policies in promoting team science. We know that academic institutions are complex organizations. Faculty have different variety of different roles and responsibilities. Therefore, in any given institutions, the policies may not be monolithic. So there can be variations. If the value placed on team science differs across career paths, then the institutions may be sending a mixed message about team science. Next one, please. So the team here studied only the CTSAs, that is Clinical and Translational Science Award Institutions, College of Medicine promotion and tenure policies. We reviewed the complete package of the College of Medicine promotion and tenure policies. So we reviewed them and we identified 3 dimensions based on the faculty members' rank, tenure eligibility, and role. For this particular study, we concentrated only on the associate professors and full professors, tenure versus non-tenure eligible faculty members. In terms of the role, we studied the research roles, clinical, education, and administrative roles. But for the sake of the study, we concentrated on the roles that have only research responsibilities. So we compared the team science value and documentation guidance that are provided in the policies as a function of these 3 dimensions. Next slide, please. I included 2 tables in here because of the time limitation. I'm not going to go into details. I'm happy to share my slides with you, but I wanted to pinpoint here, as you can see in this particular table, these are the language that we got from some policies in regards to team science value. We rated them, we coded them. You can see on the top row here, some of the policies are very specific. They support only independent science. For example, the faculty member should have only the first author or senior author publications. They should be the principal investigator of the grant applications. If you look at the bottom line of this table, there are policies that specifically support, strongly support the team science. So those policies do say that the faculty members do not have to be the first or last author, but they can be other authors and they can provide that explanations. Next table, please. This is the table that we found out some examples to show that the policies, how they mention about the team science documentation for the faculty members. Of course, there were some policies without any documentations, any guidance. And there are some that say that documentation is required, but there's no specific guidance or metrics that the committees will use to review the faculty members' dossiers. And then there are policies that say that the documentation is required and giving specific guidance to document the applications. Next slide, please. So here, the results that we found from this study. So we found out there is an average of 6 different paths per institution. Overall, there were 357 career paths across 57 CTSA College of Medicine institutions. At that time, there were 63 CTSAs. We were able to gather only 57 institutions promotion and tenure policies. So if you look at this slide and the results, the institutions are supporting, there's some kind of expressed to support the team science. You can see it was 95%. But the issue is here that there's no consistent message that provides to the faculty members that they look into the team science, what kind of team science documentations they are looking at. As you see in the last couple of last bullets here, more than half of the College of Medicine policies included no documentation guidance for one or more parts. So the team science value was positively correlated with the clarity of the documentation guidance. Next slide, please. So our conclusions were, we found out that the team science value, the support given was stronger for associate professors who are not in tenure track and not primarily research focused. And there are specific guidance are provided for research focused faculty than the other faculty members. That means if you are in the research track doing team science, the faculty members are placed to provide more documentations. So that means an extra burden for them. Next slide, please. So what are the implications? You heard throughout the conference and my previous fellow members talking about the team science. We are trying to promote team science. We have been promoting team science, but team science seems to be acceptable early in faculty members' career when they advance from assistant to associate professor level. If becoming a tenured full professor is a research-focused role is a career goal, working as a team scientist may undermine the faculty member's ability to achieve that goal. So there's going to be unintended consequences of this. So that means there are implications for the institution's culture. Next one, please. So these are the recommendations that we came up with to review the policies to determine whether the team science achievements is fairly valued across all the career paths. If not, work to align the criteria to provide a consistent message and guidance for documenting the criteria, as well as what are the metrics that the committees are looking into so that the faculty members can provide those in their documentation, their dossiers. So thank you. I think I would like to go into the questions, Heather.
Great, thank you so much, Diane. I appreciate all of those presentations so much, and I really love how they build on each other and help us understand the breadth and depth of not only the skills and competencies necessary, but also the different formats and objectives of each of the programs. So, and also thank you, Diane. If we're going to be doing this right, we need to have some way to measure it and document it and reward it in our academic and promotion and tenure policies, as oftentimes that is the currency for success for many of our current scientists, researchers, scholars. So this is current state. This is a really awesome representation of what is going on right now in our academic and research institutes. We are in a very unique and exciting time right now, as I alluded to in the introductory comments, all the different wicked problems that we are facing right now. So what will the future of team science education and training look like? What does it need to look like? And how do we best prepare ourselves to be successful, whether we are educators or curriculum designers or funders or administrators of these programs, whether we're learners in these programs or professionals who are looking to build a career in this field. And so I have posted a few questions, just general questions that are going around in my head about what were the impetus for some of these programs, how are they funded, what kind of administrative infrastructure is necessary to replicate something like this at any of our home institutions. Before I dominate the Q&A with asking the panel members these questions, I do want to encourage you all one more time, if you have a question, you can either raise your hand, which I can see virtually. You can click on a yes voting bar and I'll click on you and ask you to unmute, or you can pop it in the chat and I can read it for you or ask you to unmute. So as you're all kind of getting your courage up, I guess, to submit that, I'm gonna throw a question out to Rob, and then I'm gonna prime the pump, and I think Liz had a question for Susan, and I asked her to wait with that question. So first, Rob, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit more about how the knowledge integration students are embedded in the different specialty areas through course and lab work. And I'm particularly interested in implications that might have for change management and within traditional kind of academic pathways.
Thanks, Heather. And by change management, I'm going to infer that what you mean is effectively, how do we get knowledge integration students into a third-year biology course?
Yeah, right. Yeah, the logistics of it all.
So it's a great question. I was not around when the program was created, but I do know that there was a team of 2 people who were essentially responsible for designing the program and socializing it around campus. And there was a lot of groundwork laid. So a lot of individual conversations with associate deans and associate chairs, articulate, socializing and I think getting them on board, right? It does help that our numbers are small. So we only have about 25 in a cohort, so 100 students total on campus. So if, 20% of those people want to take biology courses and then they're spread across the different levels, it's really only 1 or 2 students. And so we're not in a situation where, I'm engineering and I have a cohort of 200 students and I want to create a biology course for them. That's a whole different kettle of fish. So really it comes down for us to, do the students meet the requirements of the course? So they have to, if they're going to take a third-year biology that has prereqs, they have to plan for that and they have to take the lead-in courses. Sometimes students, we will individually advocate on behalf of students with the associate chairs, or the students will advocate on their own, that they have equivalent knowledge and they'll get signed into a course. Some courses are restricted to majors only. And again, that takes a little bit of intervention sometimes from the associate chair in the department, but we can usually get them in if it's the case that the student has the appropriate background through other courses that they've taken. But I think a lot of that was laying the groundwork early on in terms of the value of the degree. And then of course, the structure of a new, because it was a new degree that had to go up through all the approvals through Senate Undergraduate Council and through Senate and so on. Lots of people had the opportunity to look at it and say, no, we won't be able to do this. And because it has that Senate approval, we can use that as an arguing point. Now, there are classes on campus that the students can't get into. They can't take many of the engineering undergraduate courses just because those are so cohorted and they don't have lab space and so on and so forth. What we find is it's actually interesting that some of the upper year engineering courses are actually more open to our students because they tend to start to lean into things like human interface design and user experience design. And the knowledge integration students have the design content from the first year in the core. So we've had students have significant success in a fourth year human interface design course in engineering, and then actually go on and do graduate work in systems design engineering without an engineering undergrad because they're focused in an area where their background is sufficient. So I don't know if I think that answers the question.
Thank you. Yeah, that it gives a little bit more context around it. I'm going to ask Susan to unmute, and I think Liz had a question for her, and I'll give her the opportunity to do that. But I'm also going to ask Susan, particularly again, and this time I'm really interested in virtual facilitation, virtual teams. What skills and competencies and even different attitudes do we need to have that we didn't have maybe even several months ago? So you're leading the field right now in preparing the next generation for remain virtually. What skills, tools, attitudes are you focusing on? So that's the first question, then I'll let Liz ask her follow-up.
Yes, I can go ahead with that one first because it was really interesting even putting that, that little workshop together because of course, technically we are not leading the next generation is leading us. So we started from the assumption that our graduate students would actually be able to pick up the, like how to run this, that, and the other thing that they needed on their own and that they were already doing it. So what we wanted to do was actually give them some classic team concepts and have them think about how do you actually feel like a team, think like a team, and work like a team when you have to do it in the virtual environment. So we stress trust, cohesion, psychological safety, very familiar things, right? On the cognitive side, shared mental models and transactive memory, which we of course define for them. And said, okay, now if you're in this virtual environment, how do you get those things? We have a couple of reports back from them from their experience. One of my favorites is that a number of their research teams post lockdown have set up virtual happy hours. And one of the advantages of that is that actually their professors, those PIs that are like way off traveling most of the time, are in their family setting. They get to meet their kids. It really transforms that relationship. The other thing that was really interesting is that they're finding the breakout rooms in Zoom to be much more private spaces than they get when they're physically like in a big room doing a workshop on this kind of thing or in their laboratories. And they feel like they're being much more honest with each other in the breakout room environment. So there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out, but really rooted in what do you need to be a team? You've got a narrow communication channel. Don't use it just to be task oriented. Think about all these affective and bigger cognitive issues too. There may not be time now for that other question, but I'd be glad to do whatever's appropriate afterwards for it.
And then I'm going to prime the pump again and say, Laura and Kathleen, you're up next. I'm going to ask you some questions about evaluation and metrics. So Liz, the floor is yours.
That was actually my question. I really wanted to bring up the evaluation stuff that's now going on in the chat and just mention that the Education and Training SIG is very interested in forming a working group on this very question. So please come to our session at 4:20 this afternoon if you're interested, or let Wayne or me know. We're the co-chairs of the SIG.
Great, thanks.
And I'll chime in and ask the question of Susan as well. What we found is our N was so small, we had a really hard time evaluating or figuring out a way to evaluate the kinds of questions we wish to have answers to. You know, does it make a difference for students who have gone through this program in terms of their leadership skills or their ability to facilitate or engagement in future collaborations? So Susan, I think you're on the hot seat for this one.
You know, I have to say that there's a disadvantage of this workshop module format, which is it's very hard getting the attention of the students to actually come. We've had high no-show rates, even for students who registered for the workshop. We have low response rates on the assessment surveys that we've been doing. And it makes it seem like it's almost hopeless from this format to be able to follow through into what actually happens in their teams. And that's where some of those higher touch approaches that were in a number of the other presentations may actually create more of a sense of commitment and a clearer group to follow through, because it's really the follow through that's important, right into those career pathways that our last group talked about.
Laura, I'm going to invite you to chime in here. I think you have quite a robust evaluation plan as a part of your program. And I'm also going to ask Wayne to advance the slide because there's information about the Team Science SIG. There you go. All right, Laura, the floor is yours.
Sure. So our evaluation, I would say, is an ongoing evolution. But I mentioned, so this year we piloted this new pre-post process of assessing students. Another thing that we've done this year is work with our Office of Assessment to take students who've done Best Connections and then form a match comparison group of students based on demographics, financial aid status, kind of incoming admissions ranking, courses that they've taken to try to have similar groupings of students, and then look at their outcomes on GPA, thesis completion, the kind of what they report on their senior survey results, and have certainly seen through that some differences in terms of, you know, as I mentioned, students do theses at higher levels, students report feeling more engaged and having closer relationships with faculty is another thing we saw, as well as the ability to tackle kind of complex problems and work in teams. So we're seeing some trends in that way. And I'm happy to share any of these kind of methods with other folks. The other things that I'll briefly mention, so now we're shifting to alumni, and I think the question there is like, what is a valuable alumni outcome? So Best Connections and Duke alumni are doing amazing things. It's what are we looking for? How do we show that they've carried their capacity to lead and work in teams into the professional environment in a way that's different from other alumni is something we haven't quite figured out. And then I'll also mention, because Best Connections is this kind of multifaceted program, we've also been doing some evaluation of faculty and research outcomes to demonstrate kind of to some of the discussion about the value of interdisciplinary work for faculty. We found that the kind of seed grants, if you look at them as seed grants that we've given to faculty, have had a significant return in the form of external grants, as well as high publication rates and things of that nature. So we're trying to look at both the value to the student as well as the faculty, and then also countering for the impact on community partners as well. So it's kind of hard to weave these three things together at times.
Yeah. Federal agencies that have like intramural postdoc programs and extramural have reporting requirements on career outcomes. So for example, like students who got a training grant for grad school report annually for like 10 years from the start of the award, and they track career progression. For our I remember getting one of those and asking, when am I going to have to stop? And they said 10 years, you know. And then for our intramural fellows at my institute at NIH, we similarly do an annual survey to look at career progression. And we do surveys on attitudinal change around collaboration. So we do pre-post at the start and end of the fellowship which would be like 2 or 3 years. And then we follow career progression. So the idea is that we could then correlate attitudes and career progression potentially if we get enough folks participating. And we also use the attitudinal scales for teaching impact of like short courses or evaluating impact of short courses that we teach.
Thanks, Amanda. Don actually has asked a great question, and I'm going to ask Don to unmute because maybe he could moderate the responses that he gets. Don poses, what are the aspects of training team science that are common across all groups, pre-college, undergraduate? And this gets to the question of how do we sort of stitch together and integrate a longitudinal approach for these skills and competencies and even attitudinal changes as this field continues to grow and the need for interdisciplinary team science is so apparent.
And maybe I'll focus the question a little bit more and say, I mean, we know that there are commons, right? But what are the most important ones, maybe, if you focus? So panel members in particular.
I mean, I can lead off, Don. I think it's a fantastic question. I think I'd have to give it more thought to get a precise list, but to me, I'm hearing a lot of empathy, recognition, feeling valued in the group, a lot of those kinds of things. I'm hearing a lot of project management. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll stop there and see what others are hearing.
Can I add something here too? I think that's a really, really good question. My doctoral research was on identifying the competencies required for team science leaders and managers. And so love the question. One thing that I was really surprised about was that there was so much emotional intelligence skill sets required. So I would lead off with that and also include leadership, which is, it was very wrapped up in that emotional intelligence and project management. I think since my background is does not have a lot to do with budgets and finance, that I was always a little worried that was going to come up as a key characteristic of the leader and budgets are important. It's important to know how to deal with budgets, but it was a very minor piece of the overall set of competencies that we looked at. So I think emotional intelligence is super important. Communication, both internal and external to your team. You know, are you dealing with stakeholders or are you talking about the team and what needs to be done? Project management was really important too. So I think those are kind of things that can be taught at all stages and are really critical to the work. And I'm sure there's other things, but those are the key aspects that my research kind of uncovered.
If I could add to that, you know, based on the survey that we've done of principal investigators and their teams, conflict resolution is something that came out. And maybe this is a subset of what you just said, Pips. So conflict resolution and facilitation skills that go along with emotional intelligence and empathy and all of those parts. But those specific skills have been really important.
Yeah, and the leadership part I want to add, I think Pip's list was absolutely great. The leadership is really shared leadership. What is that about? Because often students hear that as somebody else is going to be in charge, I just take orders. And that actually doesn't make teams operate very well. So really getting some of the up-to-date leadership models is quite important. And it really across all these levels, right down into middle school, you run into these things.
I totally agree with both those comments. Really, you know, absolutely critical, both of those things. I also, with the teams that I work with, I think self-reflection is really an interesting and important, you know, action kind of take time to do both individually and for the team. You know, how have things worked? How, you know, where did we go wrong? How could we do things differently? What worked really well? Those things are really important. That time to self-reflect is really important.
And I think the growth mindset that Pips mentioned is really important too. This whole sort of inquiry-based, everybody's learning together is really important. I think we've probably mentioned all the things that are important to team science. I'm not sure we prioritized.
Well, the one thing that I'll say is all these things, I think, are things that typically are not taught, right? So that's really important to make sure that that happens. And then the other thing is that we're looking at, so if you take the premise, the hypothesis that the biggest problems in this world can only be solved through teams, that this is really, really important. It's really important to be able to do that, to solve the toughest problems. And also we're identifying things that people in general, so all the way from our young people, even pre-college, all the way through our early career, even beyond, are never really trained in. So I'm concluding that this is hugely important.
So I'm going to follow up on that, Don, and I'm going to bring it to Diane, because if we, I mentioned currency, and for many of us, currency is publications and grants and that sort of thing. And to your point, Don, these are new skills and competencies that we need to learn and we need to master in order to be successful. And oftentimes it's not built into the traditional curriculum. We have to seek it out. And so how can we, as emerging interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary team scientists or scholars or educators, how do we feed that forward to help our leadership or our stakeholders, whoever they may be, better understand our contributions, our expertise in this area, and our accomplishments? And so, Diane, I'll ask you if you've got any comments about that and the work that you've done exploring P&T policies.
Yeah, you are right. I think we are like measuring that in a traditional way, with you have a publication, you have a grant award and things like that. But I think that we are missing the point in the teams. When we work as teams, not everybody can be the first author or the last author for publication, right? So that's what in our College of Medicine here, we promoted. We actually did the revisions to the College of Medicine promotion and tenure guidelines, that if you are not the first or the last or the corresponding author, you can provide us some kind of documentation to show your contribution, your significant contribution to that. I think that goes to the same, our biostatistics faculty members. Most faculty members who are engaged in community work, and then the faculty members who are doing the teaching. So how do you measure? Because some of the faculty members who are doing teaching may not necessarily have a publication, but they may have developed education module or some kind of curriculum. So I think we have to think about all these factors. I know the time is past. I saw some text are coming out, but I think this is we should discuss this. I know after we published the paper, some of the institutions have edited a little bit. They have included some guidelines to be a little bit more clear, but there is still a lot to be done.
Thank you, Diane. You guys, I'm sorry, I dropped the ball on this. I got too passionate and excited about the discussion and I stopped watching the time. So we are definitely over our allotted time. Thank you so much, panelists, for this just awesome discussion. Thank you, attendees who have stuck with us. I promise I will share a Google Doc through Slack, so watch for that, with the chat and all the resources and questions and comments that have been shared through the last 90 minutes. Phew. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather and Wayne. I especially like to thank you for organizing this panel, and to my fellow panel members.
You're here.
Yes, likewise.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
This afternoon.
You guys all did a wonderful job. We have additional